you be my new dad?
The woman in the green dress stood frozen near table 12, her manicured hand pressed against her mouth, eyes wide with what looked like shock. Around her, Chateau Noir glittered with the kind of Christmas excess only the wealthy could afford. Gold fairy lights, draped like liquid metal from the vaulted ceilings, wreaths the size of tractor tires framing every archway, and champagne flowing as freely as the judgment. For a moment, every patron assumed they were witnessing something romantic. A proposal, perhaps? A grand gesture? They were wrong. Kyrie, the ink, Johnson sat alone at the table, his broad shoulders filling out a Tom Ford suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. His hair was slicked back with precision, his posture rigid as steel, but there was no hiding what marked him. The tribal tattoos crawled up his neck like black vines, disappearing beneath his crisp white collar, and his knuckles bore intricate designs that spelled out a language only the streets understood. He tried to cover them. The makeup had sweated off within the first 10 minutes, leaving faint beige smears along his jawline that made him look even more out of place. The silence in the restaurant was suffocating. Every eye in the room tracked him like prey watching a predator decide whether to strike. 3 days ago, his mother had gripped his tattooed hand with fingers that felt like bird bones. The hospital room had smelled of disinfectant and death, machines beeping their monotonous countdown beside her bed. "Promise me you'll try to be normal, baby," she'd whispered, her voice thin as tissue paper. "Just one night. Find a reason to live that isn't money or revenge." He'd promised because she was dying, because she was the only person who'd ever looked at him and seen something other than a monster. And Kyrie Johnson always kept his promises. So he'd practiced. He'd stood in front of his bathroom mirror, rehearsing small talk like a man preparing for war. He'd researched wine pairings on his phone, memorizing the difference between Bordeaux and Burgundy. He let his men see him nervous for the first time in 5 years, watching their faces carefully hide their surprise. The reservation alone had cost him $4,500. The wine on the table, untouched, gathering condensation, was worth another $800. It had been 5 years since he'd felt a human touch that wasn't violent. 5 years since someone had held his hand without trembling. Victoria Ashford's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "You belong in a cage, not a restaurant." Kyrie's jaw clenched, but he didn't respond. He learned that silence often served him better than words. "Look at you," she continued, her voice rising just enough for nearby tables to hear. "I thought I was meeting a businessman, not a thug in a Tom Ford suit. Your appearance, those one-word answers, the way everyone flinched when you walked in." She gestured wildly with one hand, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "My friends warned me about blind dates, but I didn't think I'd need to check if my date had a criminal record just to feel safe." She snatched her designer clutch from the table and threw her napkin down like she was discarding something contaminated. This was a mistake. The click of her heels against the marble floor echoed as she stormed toward the exit. Conversations erupted in whispered bursts around him. Kyrie sat perfectly still, his hands flat on the white tablecloth, feeling every stare like a spotlight he couldn't escape. The restaurant might as well have been a courtroom, and the verdict was unanimous. "Are you sad?" The voice was small, curious, and entirely unexpected. Kyrie's gaze dropped to find a little girl standing beside his table. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old, wearing a red velvet dress with a white Peter Pan collar that made her look like she'd stepped out of a Christmas card. She clutched a teddy bear against her chest and tilted her head, studying him with the kind of unfiltered honesty only children possessed. She didn't flinch at his tattoos, didn't step back when he looked at her. She just stood there, solving some puzzle he didn't understand. "My mommy says when people are alone at Christmas, they need friends," she announced, as if this explained everything. Then, with the kind of certainty that belonged to someone who'd never learned to fear the world, she placed her teddy bear on the table between the wine glasses. The stuffed animal sat there looking ridiculous next to the crystal and silver, a splash of innocence in a room that had forgotten what that meant. The little girl looked up at him, her eyes wide and earnest. "Be my new dad?" The question hit him harder than any punch he'd ever taken. Kyrie stared at this child, this impossibly brave little girl who saw him sitting alone and decided he needed saving. Around them, the restaurant held its breath again, but this time the silence felt different. "Arabella." A woman's voice, panicked and apologetic, shattered the moment. A kindergarten teacher, by the look of her, worn coat, tired eyes, but carrying herself with quiet dignity, rushed over, reaching for the little girl. "I'm so sorry, sir. She doesn't understand." But Arabella had already grabbed his hand. Her small fingers traced the ink on his knuckles with wonder, following the patterns like they were a map. "Are these the pictures of where you've been?" Something cracked inside Kyrie's chest. The walls he'd spent 5 years building, brick by bloody brick, developed their first fissure. He looked down at this child's hand on his, so small and trusting, and felt something he thought was dead stir beneath the scar tissue. "What have I become?" he thought, "that a child's kindness feels like a miracle?" Caroline Thompson had learned to recognize danger the way other people recognize faces. It was in the details, the way the restaurant. Staff approached this man with careful deference, how they kept their distance while maintaining absolute attentiveness. The expensive suit that fit too perfectly to be anything but custom made. The tattoos that no amount of tailoring could hide, dark and deliberate, telling stories she didn't want to read. And most telling of all, the way he held himself. Still as stone, but coiled tight, like violence was just a decision away. "I'm so sorry," she said again, her hands shaking as she reached for Arabella. "She doesn't understand boundaries. She's just, Arabella, sweetie, we need to go back to our table right now." But her daughter's small hand remained locked around the man's tattooed knuckles, and Caroline's heart hammered against her ribs. This was how bad things started. This was how people like her, single mothers barely scraping by, ended up in situations they couldn't escape. Then the man moved, and Caroline flinched. He knelt down, not threateningly, not fast, but with the kind of careful precision someone used around scared animals. He was eye level with Arabella now, and when he spoke, his voice was soft enough that Caroline almost didn't hear it over the restaurant's ambient noise. "Your bear looks hungry," he said, gently untangling Arabella's fingers from his and pressing the teddy bear back into her arms. "You should feed him." Caroline's breath caught. That wasn't the voice of a man who hurt children. The restaurant manager appeared at Kyrie's elbow, wringing his hands like he was trying to squeeze water from them. "Mr. Johnson, sir, we can comp your entire evening, of course. And if you'd like us to handle this situation, the lady can finish her daughter's meal at my table." Kyrie's voice went cold, all that gentleness evaporating. "I'll move." "No," Caroline said quickly, finding her voice. "That's not necessary. We should go." But Arabella was already climbing into the chair across from where Kyrie had been sitting, her teddy bear propped up beside her like a dinner guest. The little girl beamed at the fancy silverware as if she'd just won a prize. "Arabella Marie Thompson," Caroline hissed, but it was too late. Her daughter was settled in, and the manager was pulling out a chair for Caroline with practiced insistence. Trapped between politeness and her daughter's startling stubbornness, Caroline sat. The silence was excruciating. She kept her hands folded in her lap, her posture rigid, hyper-aware of how out of place they looked. Her clearance rack dress next to his designer suit, Arabella's teddy bear beside the $800 wine. Kyrie raised one hand, and a waiter materialized instantly. "Hot chocolate," he said. "And whatever Christmas cookies you have, the kind kids like." He hadn't asked. He just knew. Caroline found that more unsettling than comforting. Arabella, however, was delighted. "Do you have pictures on your whole body?" she asked, leaning forward to study his neck tattoos. "What's that one? It looks like wings. Can you fly?" "No," Kyrie said, the corner of his mouth twitching. "I can't fly." "What about that one?" "It's a compass." "Why do you need a compass? Don't you have a phone?" "Arabella," Caroline warned, but Kyrie was already answering. "Sometimes phones don't work where I need to go." "Like the North Pole?" Arabella's eyes went wide. "Do you know Santa?" "No, Santa and I don't cross paths much." "That's sad. Santa's really nice." Arabella accepted her hot chocolate from the waiter with a solemn thank you, then turned her attention back to Kyrie. "What kind of car do you have? Is it scary?" "It's black." "That's a scary color for a car." Caroline watched this exchange with growing confusion. He answered every question with patience, never condescending, never dismissive. He looked at Arabella like she was a person worth listening to, not an inconvenience to be managed. "We don't usually eat at places like this," Arabella announced, dunking a cookie in her hot chocolate. "Mommy teaches kids like me. We're here because my friend Emma's parents invited us, but Emma got sick, so it's just us now." "Arabella," Caroline said, her cheeks burning. "It's true," Arabella insisted. "You said we were lucky to be invited. You said, That's enough. Caroline's voice came out sharper than she intended. She looked at Kyrie, forcing herself to meet his eyes. I'm a kindergarten teacher at Riverside Elementary. This isn't our usual scene. Something shifted in his expression, but she couldn't read it. I work double shifts when I can, she continued, not sure why she was explaining herself to this dangerous stranger. It's been tight since we moved here. Fresh start and all that. She didn't mention Marcus, didn't mention the debt or the restraining order or the way she still jumped when her phone buzzed with texts she was too afraid to read. Why were you alone? Arabella asked Kyrie suddenly. Don't you have a family? Sometimes grown-ups eat alone, Kyrie said. That's sad. Arabella frowned, her face scrunching up with the weight of this injustice. Nobody should be alone at Christmas. Caroline saw it then, the crack in his armor. Just for a second, this man who looked like he could break the world in half looked lost. It was the same expression she saw in her bathroom mirror every night when Arabella was asleep and the walls stopped pretending to hold her together. She'd composed 12 text messages to her sister this month, begging for money. She deleted every single one before hitting send. They finished their impromptu meal in less painful silence, Arabella filling the gaps with chatter about school and Santa and her teddy bear's complex backstory. When Caroline finally stood to leave, gathering their coats and Arabella's things, Kyrie stood too. Can I see you again? He asked. The question hung in the air like smoke. Caroline hesitated, every instinct screaming warning signs, but Arabella squealed, yes, before she could formulate a polite refusal. Kyrie reached into his jacket and produced a business card. Johnson Security Consulting, it read, with a phone number and nothing else. His fingers brushed hers as he handed it over. If you ever need anything, he said, and the words carried weight she didn't want to examine too closely. Caroline took the card, slipping it into her purse. She didn't know this simple act would unravel both their worlds. They walked out into the snowy night, Arabella skipping ahead, and Kyrie watched them from the doorway. He noticed everything. Caroline's coat was worn thin at the elbows, the lining torn at one shoulder. Arabella's shoes had tape holding the sole to the upper, barely visible in the Christmas lights. They moved through the cold with the practiced efficiency of people used to enduring. His first instinct was to solve it. Write a check, make the problems disappear the way he made everything disappear. But something about Caroline's straight spine, the way she held her head high, despite the threadbare coat, warned him she'd throw money back in his face. He pulled out his phone and dialed. Marcus, he said when his second-in-command answered. I need everything you can find on Caroline Thompson. Kindergarten teacher, Riverside Elementary. I want her history, her debts, who she's running from. Running from? Yeah, Kyrie said, watching them disappear into the falling snow. She's running from someone. He just needed to know who. Kyrie has lost the only thing that ever made him feel human. He's bleeding in his penthouse, watching the city he owns, knowing none of it matters. Can a man built from violence learn to be gentle? Can a monster earn back a child's trust? The next 3 chapters will break your heart and rebuild it. Continue watching to discover if redemption is possible, or if some people are too broken to be saved. Don't forget to subscribe if you've not done that already. The folder landed on Kyrie's desk 3 days later, heavy with the weight of someone else's suffering. Marcus Rivera had done his job well. Too well. Kyrie flipped through the pages, his jaw tightening with each revelation. Eviction notice. 30 days. The print was standard legal typeface, but the threat was clear. Caroline Thompson was being pushed out of her rundown apartment by Dennis Kowalski, a slumlord whose name appeared in enough of Kyrie's files to make his blood simmer. Kowalski had connections to the East Side crew, the kind of bottom feeders who preyed on people too poor to fight back. Debt. $47,000, medical bills, legal fees, and the remnants of a marriage that had tried to destroy her. All of it tied to her ex-husband, Marcus Thompson, who'd fought the divorce like a man fighting for property rights. Restraining order, active, but worthless. The text message screenshots made Kyrie's hands curl into fists. Marcus violated it regularly, sending threats that walked the legal line just carefully enough to avoid arrest. I know where you work. You can't hide forever. She's my daughter too. Kyrie's first instinct was surgical and simple. Pay off the debt anonymously. Have Dennis persuaded to not only drop the eviction but upgrade their living conditions. Make Marcus disappear. Not permanently, just enough to remind him that some boundaries had consequences. But Caroline's voice echoed in his head, something she'd said over hot chocolate and Christmas cookies while Arabella chattered about Santa. The worst thing about being poor is everyone thinking they can fix you, like you're broken instead of just broke. He closed the folder. This required a different approach. Riverside Elementary smelled like crayons and hope. Kyrie felt absurdly out of place in his dark suit, carrying 3 boxes of new children's books into the library. The donation was public, legitimate, and generous enough to get the principal's attention, but not so extravagant that it seemed suspicious. Mr. Johnson, the principal beamed, shaking his hand with both of hers. This is incredibly kind. Our library budget was cut this year and... Kyrie, he turned. Caroline stood in the library doorway, wearing a cardigan with patches on the elbows and an expression that was equal parts surprise and suspicion. Before she could say anything else, a small body crashed into his legs. You came... Arabella wrapped her arms around his knees, then immediately grabbed his hand to drag him toward a table covered in construction paper. Look, I drew pictures. She spread them out like treasure. Crayon drawings of stick figures, houses, and Christmas trees. In every single one, there was a figure with dark scribbles on its neck and hands. Beneath each one, in careful kindergarten letters, my friend Kyrie. Something in his chest constricted. Arabella, Caroline said softly, but her daughter was already explaining the complex narrative connecting each drawing. A story about a lonely man who learned to smile at Christmas. Caroline's eyes met his over Arabella's head, and he saw it, the twist of a mother's heart realizing her child had grown attached to something dangerous. 20 minutes later, they sat in a coffee shop 2 blocks from the school, Arabella safely deposited with the after-school program. Caroline wrapped her hands around a paper cup, not drinking, just holding on to the warmth. That was quite a coincidence, she said. You showing up at my school? I wanted to help. By donating books? Or by showing up in my life again? Kyrie leaned back in his chair. I know people who could help with employment opportunities, better paying positions, more stability. Stop. Caroline set her cup down with enough force that coffee sloshed onto the table. I don't need saving, Mr. Johnson. I need to solve my own problems. I've been doing it for 2 years, and I'll keep doing it. Her fierce independence should have frustrated him. He was used to people, accepting his help, or what passed for help in his world, with grateful desperation. But watching her hold her ground, spine straight despite the fear he could see lurking behind her eyes, he only respected her more. Fair enough, he said. Caroline's phone buzzed on the table between them. She glanced at the screen, and every ounce of color drained from her face. Her hand started shaking as she snatched it up, turning it face down, but not before Kyrie glimpsed the message preview. Found you. Merry Christmas. See you. Who's threatening you? The question came out harder than he intended. No one. It's nothing. Caroline? He leaned forward and she flinched at the intensity in his voice. Who is it? It's none of your business. She stood abruptly, grabbing her coat. I need to pick up Arabella. Thank you for the coffee. She left before he could stop her, but the fear in her eyes followed him all day. Every instinct he had screamed to eliminate the threat, to find whoever was texting her and make sure they never had the capability to frighten her again. But he knew Caroline. She'd see it as him being exactly what everyone assumed he was, a monster who solved problems with violence. That night, Kyrie's phone rang at 11:30. His man stationed outside Caroline's building, voice tight. We got a situation. Landlord just went in drunk, and I can hear shouting. Kyrie was in his car before the call ended. He heard Dennis Kowalski's slurred voice through the apartment door. Come on, Caroline. Be reasonable. There are other ways to pay rent. You're a pretty woman, and I'm a reasonable man. Kyrie kicked the door in. What happened next was brutal and efficient. Dennis barely had time to turn around before Kyrie had him by the throat, slamming him against the wall hard enough to crack plaster. The landlord's eyes went wide with recognition and terror. She's on the phone with 911, Dennis gasped. You're making this worse? Kyrie hit him, then hit him again, and again. Years of controlled violence poured into those punches, every ounce of rage he felt at men who preyed on women who couldn't fight back. Dennis crumpled to the floor, conscious but barely, blood streaming from his nose. Kyrie, stop. He turned. Caroline stood in the doorway, phone in her shaking hand, but the fear in her eyes wasn't directed at Dennis, it was directed at him. And behind her, crying, clutching her teddy bear and looking at him like he was the monster under the bed, stood Arabella. You can't just hurt people because you think it's helping. Caroline's voice cracked, somewhere between a scream and a sob. She stepped between him and Dennis, her hands out like she was stopping a wild animal. You can't... This isn't... He was going to hurt you, Kyrie said, his voice rough. And what did you just teach my daughter? Caroline's tears were streaming now. That violence solves problems? That this is what safety looks like? She pointed at the door. Get out. Get out of our lives. Caroline, now... He left, but not before making one call. His man would stay posted outside, hidden, watching. Caroline didn't need to know. Hours later, Kyrie sat in his penthouse, his knuckles split and swelling. The city sprawled below him, all those lights representing lives he'd never understand. Normal lives, gentle lives. His mother's voice haunted him. Find a reason to live. He thought he'd found it in a little girl's question and a woman's fierce pride, but looking at his bloodied hands, replaying the terror in Arabella's eyes, he understood the truth. He was too broken for this. Too stained. Some weapons couldn't be reformed into tools, no matter how much you wanted to build instead of destroy. But he could still protect them. From the shadows, from a distance where his darkness couldn't touch their light, even if they never knew. Even if it killed him. 1 week of silence. 7 days since Kyrie had seen Arabella's face crumple in fear. Since Caroline had ordered him out of their lives with a finality that felt like a sentencing. He'd respected the distance because that's what you did when you cared about someone. You gave them space even when it felt like dying. But respect didn't mean abandonment. Marcus Rivera appeared in Kyrie's office doorway. Tablet in hand, his expression grim. We got a problem. Marcus Thompson, her ex, was spotted at a bus station 3 blocks from Riverside Elementary yesterday. Asked the clerk if she knew where the teachers lived. Kyrie's jaw tightened. He say anything else? Bought a pack of cigarettes and a city map. Circled the school district. Marcus swiped to another screen. But that's not the worst part. Silver Tongue picked up chatter about her too. About you going soft over a woman and a kid. The Silver Tongue Gang. Kyrie's primary rivals for control of the South Side's dock operations. Led by a man who'd earned his nickname through an unsettling combination of charisma and cruelty. They called him The Voice because he could talk his way into anything. Your crew, your territory, your trust, right before he cut your throat. How much do they know? Kyrie asked. Enough to make her a target. Marcus set the tablet down. Word is, The Voice sees this as an opportunity. You've been distracted, pulling back from operations. He thinks if he takes something you care about, you'll either break or fold. Kyrie stood, walking to the window. Below, the city moved through its ordinary Tuesday rhythm. People going to work, living lives where the worst thing that might happen was traffic or a missed deadline. Caroline and Arabella were down there somewhere, unaware that being seen with him once had painted targets on their backs. Double the surveillance, he said. I want eyes on the school, her apartment, every route between. Already done. Marcus hesitated. Boss, if Silver Tongue is moving on this, they won't wait long. They'll want to make a statement. Kyrie's reflection in the glass looked like a stranger. Tired, haunted, nothing like the man who'd once run this city through sheer intimidation. Then we moved first. Riverside Elementary's playground was a riot of color and noise during recess. Children swarmed the jungle gym, their voices carrying across the asphalt in waves of laughter and shouted games. Arabella hung upside down from the monkey bars, her red coat hanging around her shoulders, explaining something elaborate to her friend Emma about teddy bear society. 2 men in maintenance uniforms approached the chain link fence separating the playground from the parking lot. They didn't look out of place, clipboard, tool belts, the easy posture of people who belonged. But Kyrie's man, stationed in a panel van across the street, recognized one of them. Vincent Caruso, Silver Tongue's enforcement specialist. He was on the phone before the men reached the fence. They're here, 2 of them, playground side. Inside the van, 2 more of Kyrie's crew grabbed their weapons. Arabella, Vincent called, his voice friendly, practiced. Arabella Thompson? The little girl stopped mid-swing, looking over. Recognition flickered across her face. Maybe he'd been watching the school, learning names, building familiarity. Your mom sent us to pick you up, the second man added, smiling. She said it was an emergency. Arabella's teacher training kicked in. She'd been taught about stranger danger. about how to recognize when something wasn't right. Instead of approaching, she dropped from the bars and ran toward her teacher, Miss Chen, who was monitoring the far side of the playground. Vincent's smile evaporated. He made a hand signal to his partner, Plan B. They were reaching under their maintenance coveralls when Kyrie's men emerged from the van, guns drawn but held low, trying to avoid panic. "Step away from the fence." The playground erupted. A teacher screamed. Children scattered like startled birds, some crying, others frozen in confusion. Miss Chen grabbed Arabella and ran toward the building, other teachers corralling children inside. Vincent and his partner took off running across the parking lot. Shots fired. Not from Kyrie's men, but from a third Silver Tongue operative stationed in a car providing cover. The panel van's windows spiderwebbed with bullet holes. Sirens wailed in the distance. The kidnappers dove into their vehicle and peeled out, tires screaming, leaving behind chaos and the acrid smell of gunpowder. By the time the police arrived, the school was on lockdown, parents were being called, and Arabella sat in the principal's office clutching her teddy bear, silent and small. Caroline's phone rang during her lunch break. The principal's voice was careful, professional, designed not to incite panic, but failing entirely. "Ms. Thompson, there's been an incident at the school. Arabella is safe, but we need you to come immediately." The drive took 12 minutes. It felt like hours. Caroline's hands shook on the steering wheel, her mind spinning through every horrible possibility. When she finally burst through the school's front doors, she found police everywhere, teachers giving statements, and her daughter sitting in a plastic chair looking smaller than she'd ever seen her. "Mommy." Arabella ran to her and Caroline caught her, holding on like she could physically prevent the world from touching her baby. "What happened?" she demanded, looking between the principal and the police officer. "There was an attempted kidnapping," the officer said. "Two men tried to lure your daughter from the playground. We believe—" "Ms. Thompson." She turned. Kyrie stood in the hallway, flanked by two of his men, and the look on his face made her knees weak. Not because he was frightening, but because he looked guilty. "This is because of you," she said, and it wasn't a question. He didn't deny it. "They targeted her to get to me. I won't apologize for protecting her." The officer stepped between them. "Sir, I'm going to need you to—" "He's already given his statement, officer," another cop interrupted, appearing from a side office. His tone was deferential in a way that made Caroline's stomach turn. Kyrie had police on his payroll. Of course he did. "You're coming with me," Kyrie said to Caroline. "Both of you. My penthouse is secure, fortified. They won't try again if you're there." "Absolutely not," Caroline said, but even as the words left her mouth, she felt Arabella's arms tighten around her neck. "It's not a request." Kyrie's voice went cold, the gentleness from Christmas Eve completely gone. "Silver Tongue won't stop. They know where you live, where she goes to school, your routine. You can hate me later, but right now, you're coming with me." Two of his men flanked her, not threatening, but absolutely prepared to enforce Kyrie's will if necessary. Caroline looked at the police officer, but he was already looking away, suddenly very interested in his notepad. No one was going to help her. This was Kyrie's city, and she just learned exactly what that meant. "Mommy," Arabella whispered, and the fear in her voice made the decision. "Fine," Caroline said, "but this isn't over." "I know," Kyrie said quietly. "Let's go." The penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of the Meridian Tower, the kind of building where residents had their own private elevator access and security clearances. Armed guards stood at every entrance, and the elevator required both a key card and a fingerprint scan. As they ascended, Arabella stayed pressed against Caroline's side, silent in a way that was worse than crying. The doors opened directly into Kyrie's living space. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city at sunset. All gold light and shadow. The furniture was expensive and minimal. Sharp lines, dark leather, everything designed for someone who didn't live so much as exist. There was no warmth here, no softness, just controlled. Space and the weight of money. "The guest wing is this way," Kyrie said, leading them down a hallway. He opened a door to reveal a bedroom that looked like a hotel suite. King bed, private bathroom, sitting area with a television. "Arabella can sleep in here with you, or there's another bedroom next door if she wants her own space." He disappeared and returned with armfuls of toys still in their packaging. Dolls, puzzles, art supplies, a massive teddy bear that cost more than Caroline's monthly rent. "I don't want your gifts," Caroline said quietly, watching Arabella stare at the toys with confused longing. "They're not for you." Kyrie set them down and left without another word. The hours crawled. Caroline tried to make it feel normal. Ordered dinner from Kyrie's chef, let Arabella watch cartoons, ran her a bath, but normal was impossible when armed men patrolled outside the door and bulletproof glass separated them from the world. After Arabella finally fell asleep, exhausted by fear and confusion, Caroline found Kyrie in his office. He sat behind a desk covered in monitors showing security camera feeds, the building entrance, the hallways, the school, her apartment building. "How many people have you killed?" she asked. He didn't look up from the screens. "Enough to keep you safe tonight." "You think this is safety?" Caroline gestured at the fortress around them. "Armed guards and locked doors? This is a cage, Kyrie. This is a prison with expensive furniture." "It's alive." He finally looked at her, and the exhaustion in his eyes caught her off guard. "A cage is better than a grave." "No." She stepped closer, anger overriding caution. "A cage is just dying slowly. I won't let you do this to my daughter. I won't let you teach her that this is what life looks like, running and hiding and surrounding ourselves with guns because you can't figure out how to exist without violence." "I own this city." The words exploded out of him, and for a second, Caroline saw the monster everyone feared. "I can keep you safe. I can make sure no one ever touches you or her, or you can own the city, Kyrie." She cut him off. "But you don't own us." The silence that followed felt like falling. Kyrie looked at her, something crumbling behind his eyes, and then his gaze moved past her to the doorway. Arabella stood there in her pajamas, crying, clutching the teddy bear from Christmas Eve, the one she'd given him, not the expensive replacement he'd bought. She'd woken to shouting, and now she was looking at Kyrie not with wonder or curiosity, but with fear. "Arabella," he started, but she ran. Not to him, away from him, hiding behind her mother's legs. The little girl who'd asked him to be her dad now saw him as the monster he'd always been. Caroline knelt down, wrapping her arms around Arabella, and when she looked up at Kyrie, her expression was resolute. "If we stay here, her childhood dies. I won't let you sacrifice her innocence for your guilt." She stood, lifting Arabella onto her hip, and walked to where Kyrie had set the expensive gifts, the toys, the clothes, the jewelry she'd never asked for and never wore. One by one, she picked them up and set them on his desk. "Unlock the elevator," she said. "Caroline, they're still out there. Then I'll deal with it the way I've dealt with everything else in my life. Alone." Her voice didn't waver. "Unlock the elevator, Kyrie." For a long moment, he just stood there. This man who could command armies, who could make people disappear with a phone call, rendered powerless by the sight of a child who feared him. Then he reached for his phone and pressed a button. "It's unlocked." Caroline carried Arabella to the elevator, pressed the button, and didn't look back. The doors closed on Kyrie standing alone in his fortress, surrounded by everything he'd built and nothing that mattered. On his couch sat the old teddy bear Arabella had given him at Christmas, forgotten in her fear, left behind like a verdict. Marcus appeared in the doorway. "Boss, do we mobilize against Silver Tongue? They're going to see this as weakness. We need to respond." Kyrie stared at that teddy bear, thinking about a little girl asking a monster to be her father, about a woman who'd rather face danger than compromise her principles. He thought about his mother's last words. Find a reason to live. He'd found it, and then he destroyed it with the only tool he knew how to use: violence. "No," he said finally. "We don't go to war." "What?" Kyrie picked up the teddy bear, its button eyes catching the light. "We disappear." For 48 hours, Kyrie, the Ink Johnson, vanished from the south side. His lieutenants called his cell and got voicemail. His enforcer showed up at the penthouse to find it empty, cleaned out like he'd never lived there. The surveillance feeds went dark. The weekly collection stopped. In the criminal underworld, silence from a man like Kyrie Johnson meant one of two things. He was planning something catastrophic, or he was already dead. His soldiers gathered in nervous clusters at their usual spots: the warehouse on Pier 9, the social club on Amsterdam Avenue, waiting for orders that never came. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said he'd finally been taken out by federal agents. Others whispered that Silver Tongue had gotten to him first, that the voice had done what no one else could manage. Marcus Rivera knew better. He'd found his boss in the last place anyone would look: a studio apartment in Greenfield, 20 miles from the south side, the kind of anonymous building where residents kept to themselves and nobody asked questions. The apartment had nothing. A mattress on the floor, a folding chair, instant coffee on the counter. Kyrie sat at a card table covered in ledgers, file folders, and a laptop, systematically dismantling an empire it had taken him a decade to build. Boss, what are you doing? Marcus stood in the doorway, genuinely confused. Making a list, Kyrie said without looking up. Every territory, every contract, every debt owed to me. I'm liquidating. Liquidating? Marcus stepped inside, closing the door. You mean selling? To who? Anyone who'll pay fair value. The dock operations go to the West Side crew. They've wanted it for years. The union contracts can be bought out by the legitimate security firms that have been trying to muscle in. The protection rackets? He paused, jaw tight. Those just stop. Immediately. Marcus stared at him like he was speaking another language. You're giving up everything. For what? For her? For me. Kyrie finally looked up and Marcus saw something in his boss's eyes he'd never seen before. Clarity. This life, it was supposed to be temporary. A way to survive, then a way to gain power, then just what I did. But it's not who I want to be. The voice isn't going to just let you walk away. He'll see this as weakness. He'll come after what you're giving up, then he'll come after you. I know. Kyrie closed the ledger. That's why I'm meeting with him tomorrow. The neutral ground was a shuttered factory in the industrial zone, nobody's territory, watched by nobody who mattered. Kyrie arrived alone, as agreed, walking through the rusted doors into a space that smelled of oil and decay. The voice stood in the center of the empty floor, flanked by 4 of his men, all armed. He looked nothing like his reputation suggested. Medium height, forgettable face, the kind of man you'd pass on the street without a second glance. But when he spoke, his voice carried a hypnotic quality that made you want to listen, to believe, to follow. The ink, he said, spreading his arms in mock welcome. I heard you'd gone soft, but I didn't believe it until now. Coming here alone, ready to negotiate. This isn't the man who took the south side with nothing but his fists and his rage. That man's tired, Kyrie said simply. The voice circled him slowly, predatory. Tired. Because of a kindergarten teacher and her daughter, you're willing to give up everything. Your territory, your reputation, your power. For what? Love? He said the word like it was a disease. I'm willing to give up everything to not be a monster anymore. Noble. The voice stopped in front of him. Stupid, but noble. Let me tell you what happens next, Kyrie. You walk away and I take everything anyway. Your docks, your contracts, your men, they all become mine. And then, because I can't have anyone thinking they can just retire from this life, I find that teacher, I find that little girl, and I make sure everyone knows what happens when the ink goes soft. Kyrie had expected this, had prepared for it. Or, he said quietly, I give you everything willingly. Clean transfer, no blood, no war. I hand over the docks, the union contracts, 3 of my warehouses, and full territory rights to the south side. All of it. You get the biggest expansion you've ever had without firing a shot. The voice's eyes narrowed. In exchange for? You leave Carolyn Thompson and her daughter alone. Permanently. Put the word out. They're untouchable. Anyone who goes near them answers to you. That's it? That's your negotiation? The voice laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're offering me your entire empire for the safety of 2 people? Yes. The silence stretched between them. The voice studied Kyrie's face, looking for the angle, the trick, the hidden play. But there was nothing. Just a man surrendering everything he'd built for a chance at something he'd never had. You really have gone soft, the voice said finally. Your men are going to think you're weak. The other crews are going to pick apart whatever you have left. And you're going to end up nobody, just another ex-con trying to go straight. Probably dead within a year. Probably. Kyrie agreed. The voice extended his hand. Deal. Your territory, your contracts, your operations, all transferred to me by the end of the week. And the teacher and her kid are off limits. I'll spread the word. Break it, and you answer to Silver Tongue. They shook on it, and with that handshake, Kyrie Johnson's empire ceased to exist. As Kyrie walked out of the factory, one of the voice's men called after him. Hey, Ink, You really giving up everything for a woman and a kid? Kyrie paused at the door, looking back. No, he said. I'm giving up everything to not be a monster anymore. They just gave me a reason to try. Caroline's mailbox had a foreclosure notice when she returned to her apartment that night. 30 days to vacate or face eviction. She stared at it, numb, while Arabella tugged at her coat, asking about dinner. This was her life now. Back to the razor's edge between survival and collapse, but at least it was hers. At least Arabella could go to school without armed guards and locked doors. At least they could breathe, except Arabella kept asking about Kyrie every day without fail. Where did he go, Mommy? Is he okay? Did we make him sad? Caroline didn't have answers. She'd checked his business card. The number was disconnected. She'd driven past his building. The doorman claimed not to know him. It was like he'd been erased. Part of her was relieved. The rational part that knew being close to him meant danger. But another part, the part that had seen loneliness in his eyes that matched her own, felt guilty. Like she'd asked him to be better and then abandoned him the moment he showed he was trying. 3 days after the eviction notice, something changed. Caroline logged into her bank account to see how many meals she could stretch before the next paycheck and found her balance wrong. Way wrong. The $47,000 in debt, medical bills from Arabella's emergency appendectomy last year, legal fees from the divorce, the credit card debt Marcus had left her with, all of it showed as paid in full. She called the bank, hands shaking. Yes, Ms. Thompson, we show multiple payments made on your behalf over the past week. All your outstanding debts have been cleared. By who? The payments were made anonymously through several different channels. Legal? All of them, but we don't have a name. The eviction notice disappeared next. Her landlord called, apologetic and confused, saying there had been a clerical error, and her lease was actually renewed for another year at the current rate. Then the envelope arrived. It was thick, expensive paper delivered by courier. Inside, legal documents transferring ownership of a house to her name. Not a mansion, not a penthouse, a modest 3-bedroom in Riverside Heights, the kind of neighborhood where kids could play in the yards and parents didn't triple check the locks. The school district was excellent. There was a park 2 blocks away. The deed was in her name only. No cosigners, no conditions, no strings. Just a note handwritten on plain paper. For Arabella's childhood. No strings. K. Caroline sat on her threadbare couch and cried. Not because she was ungrateful, but because she understood what this meant. Kyrie had found a way to help that didn't require her to compromise, didn't make her feel owned or rescued. He'd given her security without asking for anything in return, and he disappeared completely, not even staying close enough to see if she accepted. She tried to call the disconnected number anyway. It rang this time, once, before going to a generic voicemail. She hung up without leaving a message, not sure what she'd even say. Thank you? I'm sorry? Come back? All of them felt inadequate. Kyrie's new apartment was in a neighborhood he'd never worked, never controlled, never touched. He was just another resident here. The quiet guy in 4B who kept to himself and paid rent on time. His neighbors didn't know his face. Police didn't track his movements. He could walk to the corner store without anyone flinching. It felt like learning to breathe in a different atmosphere. Court-ordered anger management met every Tuesday at the community center. Kyrie had ordered himself there, sitting in a circle of men who'd hit their partners, their children, strangers in bars. He listened to their stories and recognized the same thread of violence that ran through his own life. The same excuse, I was protecting something. I couldn't control it. It just happened. The counselor, a small woman named Dr. Patricia Chen, who somehow wasn't afraid of any of them, had one response. It didn't just happen. You made choices. Now make different ones. So Kyrie tried. He bought clothing that covered his tattoos, turtlenecks, long sleeves, high collars. He practiced speaking in stores and coffee shops, learning to make his voice softer, less commanding. He stopped carrying a weapon. The first week without a gun felt like walking around naked, but he forced himself through it. He read parenting books he bought from a used bookstore, their pages worn from other hands, other people trying to be better. He watched YouTube videos about positive discipline, healthy communication, how to talk to children about feelings. It all felt absurd. A man with blood on his hands learning about timeouts and growth mindsets. But he kept at it. Late at night, he'd stand outside Caroline's old apartment building just for 45 minutes, just to see if they were okay. He never got close, never let himself be seen. When they moved to the new house, he followed the pattern, parking 3 blocks away where he could see their lit windows but nothing more. Just checking. Just making sure they were safe. It was pathetic and he knew it. A monster lurking in the shadows, pretending proximity to goodness might somehow rub off. But it was all he had. Marcus found him there one night, his car pulling up beside Kyrie's. "Boss, you gotta stop this. It's been 2 weeks. You're torturing yourself. I'm making sure they're safe." "They are safe. You made sure of that." The voice kept his word. Silver tongue spread the message. And the ex-husband, Marcus smiled grimly. "Let's just say he got a very convincing reason to relocate to Florida. He won't be texting her anymore." Kyrie's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "I didn't ask you to. You didn't have to. Some things we do because they're right." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "The crew's been asking about you. They don't understand what you did. Most of them think you lost your mind." "Maybe I did. Or maybe you found it." Marcus pulled out an envelope. "Final transfer document. Everything signed over to the voice. Johnson Security Consulting is officially dissolved. You're a civilian now, boss. Congratulations." Kyrie took the envelope but didn't open it. "What are you going to do?" "Me? I'm joining Westside Crew. They're going legitimate. Real security work, bodyguard details for celebrities, that kind of thing. Turns out my particular skills are marketable when applied legally." He grinned. "Who knew?" They sat in comfortable silence, 2 men who'd survived violence together now figuring out how to survive peace. "You gonna knock on her door?" Marcus asked finally. "No." "Why not?" "Because I'm not ready." Kyrie stared at the lit windows of Caroline's house, imagining Arabella inside, safe and warm. "I'm still becoming the man who deserves to knock on that door. I'm not there yet." "When will you be?" "I don't know." He started his car. "But I'll know when I am." December the 24th arrived cold and clear, 1 year since the disastrous date at Chateau Noir. Kyrie stood on Caroline's porch, heart hammering harder than it ever had, facing down rival crews or police raids. He wore something deliberately ridiculous, an oversized Christmas sweater with a grinning reindeer on the front, the kind of thing he'd have burned on sight a year ago. It covered his neck tattoos completely, made him look almost harmless. Almost. In his hands, a teddy bear. Not expensive, not designer. Just a simple brown bear with button eyes, the kind a child might actually love instead of be intimidated by. A friend for the bear Arabella had left behind in his penthouse. He'd been standing there for 5 minutes, building courage when the door opened. Caroline stood there in jeans and a flour-dusted apron, surprise written across her face. "Kyrie." He looked different, she thought, softer somehow, despite the same dangerous frame and dark eyes. The sweater helped, but it was more than that. Something about his posture, less coiled, less ready to spring. "Hi," he said, and his voice cracked slightly. "I know I should have called, but your number, I didn't have it, and I thought maybe—" "Kyrie?" Another voice, small and hesitant. Arabella appeared behind her mother, peeking around her legs. She was bigger than he remembered. Like children had a way of growing when you weren't watching. She looked at him warily, that memory of violence still there in her eyes. It broke something in him all over again. He knelt down slowly, deliberately non-threatening, and held out the teddy bear. "I brought this for Mr. Bear's friend, if you still want him." Arabella didn't move for a long moment. Then, slowly, she stepped forward and took the bear, hugging it against her chest alongside the old one she still carried everywhere. "I'm sorry I scared you," Kyrie said, meeting her eyes at her level. "I was trying to protect you, but I did it wrong. I did everything wrong." "Are you still scary?" Arabella asked with the brutal honesty of children. "Sometimes," he admitted. "I'm trying not to be, but I'm still learning." Arabella studied him, head tilted, solving another puzzle. "Mommy says learning is okay. She says everyone makes mistakes." "Your mommy's a very smart teacher." "Are you going to yell again?" The question hit like a punch. "I'm going to try really hard not to, and if I do, I want you to tell me I'm being scary and I'll stop. Okay?" Arabella considered this, then nodded slowly. "Okay." She looked at the teddy bear in her arms. "What's his name?" "I don't know. I thought maybe you could name him." "Hope," Arabella said immediately. Because he came back. Kyrie's throat tightened. He looked up at Caroline, who was watching this exchange with tears in her eyes, and found he couldn't read her expression. Relief? Anger? Something else entirely? "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. "Just to talk?" Caroline looked at her daughter, then at this man who'd given up everything, then disappeared, then somehow found his way back. She thought about the house she lived in, the debts that had vanished, the year of peace they'd had because he'd made himself the monster one last time to keep them safe. She thought about the eviction notice on her old apartment, the fear that had been her constant companion, and how both had disappeared when he entered her life. "You can stay for breakfast," she said finally. "Just breakfast." Kyrie's relief was visible, his shoulders dropping tension he'd been carrying for months. "Thank you." "But Kyrie?" She waited until he looked at her. "This doesn't fix anything. You can't buy your way into our lives with houses and paid debts. If you want to be here, you have to earn it. Every day. Do you understand?" "Yes," he said. "I understand." She stepped aside, letting him enter the home he'd bought but never expected to see the inside of. To everyone who made it to the end, thank you for giving 40 minutes of your day to Kyrie, Caroline, and Arabella. Their story matters because you made it matter. Let's connect. Comment below. Where in the world are you watching from? Subscribe. More stories like this coming soon. Like, if you believe monsters can choose to be men, I'm reading every comment. I want to know. 1. Your country, city. 2. Which chapter hit hardest? 3. What you'd name Arabella's teddy bear.